Hey everybody, welcome back to U.S. History. So today we're doing the next two sections of notes, Teddy's Square Deal and Segregation and Discrimination. So go ahead and get your notes out and let's get started. So of course, we're talking about Teddy Roosevelt. He was our 26th president. He was in office from 1901 to 1908. Now, of course, this is not the actual Teddy Roosevelt. This is Teddy Roosevelt as portrayed by Robin Williams in the Night Museum movies. Prior to serving as president, he served in the U.S. Armed Forces. And he served in the New York Army National Guard and was present during the Spanish-American War. We'll talk more about the Spanish-American War next unit, so keep that in mind when we get to that unit in a couple of weeks. He went on the record saying, "It is the duty of the president to act upon the theory that he is the steward of the people, and to assume that he has the legal right to do whatever the needs of the people demand, unless the Constitution or the law explicably forbid him to do it." Okay, take a minute to think about that. What is he trying to say there? Maybe jot down a couple of ideas in your notes. So one of the huge things he did was pass what he referred to as the Square Deal. Now, this is the term given to various reforms sponsored by the Roosevelt administration. Again, he was also the president, the famous talk softly and carry a big stick. And he wanted to really start breaking up these trusts that had been built all over the country. Now, Roosevelt filed a number of suits under the Sherman Antitrust Act. He finally started to enforce it once he was in office. And he wanted to stop the trusts that hurt public interest. As a result, and this is probably one of the most famous examples, in 1904, the Supreme Court actually dissolved the Northern Securities Company that had monopoly over Northwestern railroads. They broke them into two companies because they realized, well, you have too much control. You can control all the prices in this entire part of the country, which wasn't fair to the public. Now, there was also a coal strike in 1902. This is probably one of the major ones. Coal miners in Pennsylvania went on strike, and as a result, coal reserves around the country were running low. Roosevelt stepped in to help end the strike, but it did set a new precedent that hadn't been set before, that the government could intervene during a strike and be involved, when previously they were like, you guys do your own thing, I'm not going to deal with this. He also passed a couple of laws, great one being the Meat Inspection Act, which established strict cleanliness requirements and created programs for federal meat inspection. That's why we talk about things like grade A beef. That was established under the Roosevelt administration. We also had the Pure Food and Drug Act, which stopped the sale of contaminated food and medicine and required the truth in labeling. Prior to this, companies didn't have to tell you what was in their products. So for all you know, the food you're consuming is also packed full of arsenic and lead and a whole bunch of other toxic chemicals, and they didn't have to tell you. Same thing was true with a bunch of medicines. They didn't have to tell you, oh, there's opiates in this that will make you addicted. They didn't have to tell you until this law was passed. Now, personally, one of the biggest parts of the Square Deal that I appreciated was that of conservation. He made efforts to conserve natural resources and protect the wilderness. He set aside a decent amount of land all across the country for forest reserves, water power sites, and national parks. It is under Roosevelt's administration that the National Park Service really began to be a presence in the government. And he also established, I believe, 5 new national parks while he was in office. All right, so we're moving on to the second section. So, some background for this to get us kind of back into this mindset. 10 years after Reconstruction, African Americans were able to vote and hold public office. By the turn of the century, legal policies of racial discrimination prevented this from happening. Things like poll taxes, literacy tests, all these sorts of things in the South especially were meant to limit their ability to participate in the government. So when it came down to it, they legalized a lot of discrimination, especially in the South. Jim Crow laws, especially. These segregated blacks and whites. There's a couple of images of segregation signs there for you to look at. They also provided a lot of voting restrictions. Things like literacy tests and property requirements prevented most African Americans from voting. Also, a poll tax, which was usually pretty expensive and more than anybody could actually pay. And a grandfather clause, which stated if your grandfather could vote, you could vote. So that allowed white people to vote because their grandfathers had been able to vote. But it didn't mean that for African Americans. So out of this, we do get a major Supreme Court case, Plessy v. Ferguson. Now, the Supreme Court in this ruled that segregation was legal under the stipulation and idea of separate but equal, stating it is legal to keep races apart as long as they have access to the same public facilities, namely schools, was their big thing. So this approval from the Supreme Court allowed essentially for 65 years of legalized racism in the South under Jim Crow laws. We'll talk a lot more about the consequences of this when we get to the Civil Rights Movement. So a number of expectations in the South. There was this unspoken racial etiquette that was expected. These were behaviors expected of African Americans in the South. Those who didn't, quote unquote, know their place were often persecuted, and they could lose their jobs or be attacked. About 3,000 died between 1885 and 1900 from lynchings and shootings. For those of you unfamiliar with the term of lynching, that means they were hung. So as a result of this, we have something known as the Great Migration. African Americans migrated north. They were like, well, things were better for us in the north, so why not go there? However, things were better, but they were still discriminated against. They were typically denied jobs, union memberships, equal pay. They were forced into segregated neighborhoods, and there was a number of race riots, especially in the North, that allowed for a lot of issues during this era. So that's going to do it for notes for today. I'll see you all next time. Bye, everyone.